Welcome everyone to the third of the EIG webinar series. Thank you very much to everyone who has listened in to the webinars so far. We're really pleased by the amount of interest that has been shown. If anyone has any feedback that they wish to give us regarding the webinars, or indeed if anyone should wish to volunteer to deliver one of them, please send us an email. You can find our contact details on the EIG Conferences website. Similarly on the website, if you missed the two earlier EIG webinars, the slides are available, as are links to the EIG YouTube channel where the recordings have been posted. The slides and the recording from this webinar will also be available on the website, so that's eigconferences.com. We're delighted today that our speaker is James Dodds, and James has indicated that he's happy to have questions as we go along with this presentation, so you don't have to wait until the end. However, please type your questions into the Q&A section. There should be a button at the bottom of your screen to open this. There is also a chat section there, but I would ask that you please put your questions in the Q&A section so they're easier for us to see. So thank you very much for doing that. As I said, we're delighted to welcome James as our speaker today. He is a water management specialist and is the chairperson and founder of Envireauwater. He is a fellow of the Institute of Quarrying and has over 30 years of experience in the mineral industry, both in the UK and overseas, including mining projects in Europe, Africa and the Middle East. He is a nationally recognised expert in water abstraction licensing, but also has been involved in a range of other projects involving water resources and geotechnical hydrogeology. The title of James's talk today is Life After the Water Act 2003 Transition Period. James, over to you.
Thank you, Teresa, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm assuming it's afternoon. If you don't volunteer to do these talks, I can assure you, you get volunteered, which is what happened to me. And despite staying well below the radar on EIG presentations, I got collared. So I suggest that if you don't want people like me to be giving these talks, then volunteer yourself. Life after the Water Act. We've heard enough of life before the Water Act 2003 transition period. That is all an old story, and it's time to move forward and move on. Moving forward, of course, in this context is from 2018, not from today. It's a wide subject. Issues around abstraction licensing, policy, regulation, law, the different European legislation, directives, the stuff Barnaby was talking about last time. It is a massive subject. So I'm going to focus on one aspect, which I think is of the core to the practical implementation of work, which is the HIA process, or the hydrogeological impact assessment process. So that's what I'm going to focus on for the next 35 minutes or so. It'll be longer if there's lots of questions. Fundamental to those to the HIA process, to the elements that are on the screen there. Data and evidence-based gathering is key to the process that we need to go through. How the analysis needs to change, our analysis of that data and evidence base, how that needs to change to meet the new framework. We'll talk about that. How information should be presented and the framing of that information for the audience that we're now delivering the information to. So that's the sort of stuff I'm going to cover. if you thought you were going to listen to something far more interesting and different, now is your opportunity to leave. Otherwise, hold on to your seats and we will set off. The audience, identifying an audience for any piece of work is critical. If you prepare a piece of work for the wrong audience, you will confuse that audience and you won't get the delivery that you're expecting to get. So I'm going to start there, and it's really important to understand that the audience has changed from the 1st of January 2018. So prior to the 1st of January 2018, our primary audience was the Mineral Planning Authority. So we would do a hydrogeological impact assessment in order to support a planning application. And the audience of that report was, as I said, the Mineral Planning Authority. The Environment Agency, I forgot to say something in my introduction, but I will come back to that in a minute. The Environment Agency was a secondary audience. They're a consultee to the Mineral Planning Authority, but they're not the decision maker. Post 2018, we're now while we have a planning application to do, the subject of this talk is an abstraction license application. And the primary and only audience of that application is the Environment Agency. They may consult with others, like Natural England, internally in the Natural Resources Wales, but they're the primary audience, by far the most primary audience, and the decision maker. That's a big difference. The Mineral Planning Authority are planners. That's what they do. And they think in terms of balance. They're balancing the pros and cons of an application that's being put forward. And ultimately, they can take a view as planners, and ultimately the members of a planning committee can take a different view based on largely on politics. Oh dear. The Environment Agency, Natural Resources Wales, and throughout this presentation, remember, we're talking about England and Wales. The legislation that affects abstraction licensing for quarries within this context is specific to England and Wales. Northern Ireland and Scotland are different. So if I just say Environment Agency, I apologise to our colleagues in Wales, but I am not forgetting Natural Resources Wales. In any event, the people in those organisations are fundamentally scientists. They think in terms of data, they think in terms of analysis, and they think in terms of, inverted commas, facts. They're not balancing a view, they're interpreting data, analysis, and forming a factual opinion. That is a very, very different audience, and it fundamentally changes the approach that we need to take. So what approach do we take? Well, we need to go back to 2007. And in 2007, that report was produced. The reference is there. It's a science report, hydrogeological impact appraisal for dewatering abstractions. And that report was written by water management consultants on behalf of the Environment Agency at that stage. It was pulled together quite quickly because the introduction of abstraction licensing for dewatering was only 6 months away in 2007. So we have a document which is, however number of years that is, 13 years old, which we're now picking up and starting to use. It's important to remember that the people that were around that wrote that report aren't around now. Well, they are, but not within the context of this they're not, most of them aren't involved in the industry, and those that are in different parts of the regulator. In fact, one of the key authors is in NRW and isn't on the front line anymore. So the background, the rationale, and the ethos of that document have been lost just in the mists of time, and that's an important consideration. Having said that, it's a good piece of work. It's fairly heavy read. There's 140 pages of techie stuff. It's designed to be a techie thing. It's designed to be read and understood by hydrogeologists and other water resources scientists, both internally within the regulatory system and externally. And it gives what I think is a good sound structure for the development of an HIA within this context. It may need, within the modern world, it needs to be linked to sort of groundwater protection policy type stuff, and the way in which that has evolved since 2007, and it needs to be linked to more higher level risk assessment tools, strategic risk assessment tools like Greenleaf's 3 and the other DEFRA pointers, signposts to different risk assessment tools. But as a fundamental approach, it's sound. If you're doing HIAs, it's important that you understand what's in that document and understand what it means. And there's some good hydrogeological interpretation of systems, which I would direct you to if you're involved in the process. Fundamentally, the process in that document follows a series of steps. There's more than 9 steps. There's another slide of steps as well, which I'll click to in a moment. This isn't a prescriptive set of steps. However, the topics that each step raises are important to think about. And I prefer to think of these as thinking points. And when looking at any application process, HIA process for abstraction licensing for quarries, it's important to sit back, think through these steps, and decide the order that you might do them in, decide whether you need to do every single step, how relevant they are to the particular quarry in question, how much effort you need to put into any particular step, and as importantly, do I understand the point that's being made in those steps? Do I understand the science that is being discussed in any particular step? Do I know what apportion the likely flow impacts to the water features means? If you don't know what it means, then the base document gives a good explanation, and obviously there are other specialists or sources of information that you can refer to. But it's a good series of steps. It covers all the key points, and as I say, it's they're thinking points. Do I understand what's going on? As with any system that follows steps, there's a degree of iteration, and iteration is an important aspect of this presentation, and I'll talk about iteration more in the next lump. As you can see, we finish off with 14 steps. That's a lot of steps. That's a lot of things to think about. The constraint on where you go with the steps is all about cost and value. Not everything has to be done to the same degree. Not every dewatering project is going to destroy the earth. The vast majority don't. Some are very straightforward. Small sand and gravel dewatering operations are very easy to understand, to conceptualize, and to predict what's going to happen. Large karst limestone deposits are not easy to understand, and by their very nature are very difficult to predict what's going to happen. It doesn't mean to say they can't be understood and the risks can't be mitigated, but they are not straightforward at all. So the process that's described, this stepwise process, is an excellent framework. It gives you the framework on which you can think about how to construct a project, how to construct an HIA. The steps aren't prescriptive, they're thinking points. Yeah, not every step has to be gone through. The steps don't have to be gone through in the order in which they're presented. The level of effort that you're going to go to in any particular step needs to be matched to the situation and is constrained by the cost and the value that you're going to extract from that cost. Fundamentally, the method, the step-by-step method, is all about developing an appropriate conceptual model for your system. If you don't have an appropriate conceptual model, then you're going to fail at the first hurdle. So it's about, is my conceptual model an appropriate conceptual model for the scale of the problems in front of me? That step-by-step process feeds through iteratively within a three-tier structure. And it's that three-tier structure that is used to decide whether or not you've got enough information, whether or not you've decided that you've you know what's going to happen, basically, which is where we'll go to on the next slide. Before I do that, have we got any questions or queries or disagreement at that stage, Teresa?
No questions so far, James.
Okay. Good. They must be busy typing long ones, I guess. So looking at that in a slightly more graphic way, what we're doing through the step process is that we're fundamentally developing a conceptual model. That conceptual model is the thing that explains to us as specialists how the system works, and it's the fundamental tool that we're going to use to explain to the regulator and anybody else that's interested how that system works and why we have confidence that whatever impacts that we're predicting are reasonable. I didn't use the word correct, but I did use the word reasonable. So the left-hand side of the screen there shows the concept that was developed by the Environment Agency, or even possibly the National Rivers Authority, in the late 1990s, I guess, which is this conceptual spiral. So we're starting off in our mind with some initial ideas, our first conceptual model, if you like. We've got some initial ideas. We test those ideas against data and evidence. That refines the conceptual model. We test, we get a better conceptual model. We test, we get a better conceptual model. And so we go through. So it's this iterative process that leads us to an appropriate level of understanding. And it's really important to get the fact that it's an appropriate level of understanding. It's not the best possible level of understanding. Not every project needs 3 PhD theses to be produced on it. Some projects even I can do, which is about just below tier 1. But what is important is it's appropriate for the risks at hand. It's appropriate for the conceptual model that's being developed. So on the right hand of that screen is that process in a slightly different form, and this is based on an image from the Environment Agency document, but it's not the same as the image in the Environment Agency document, because I've changed it to use the word most appropriate in the middle boxes as we go up the spirals. The Environment Agency document, I can't remember what it uses, but it implies that you've got to get to the best possible. I think it says best possible actually, which I just disagree with. What's important is it's the most appropriate for the tier that you're in. Tier 1 is the simplest tier, and I'll come back and describe the tiers a little bit later on. So we work up that, we test ourselves. Do we understand enough? If it's no, we need to go up the tree. We need a more detailed model, conceptual model. Are we happy yet? No. So we go up to tier 3, where we're developing something very detailed in the most sensitive or complex situations. So a simple tiered assessment, or ranked or tiered assessment that allows us to progress in a sensible way is the way we want to do it. So fundamental to that process is data and evidence. We're not going to build an appropriate conceptual model if we don't have data and evidence to build it. And as I said at the beginning, fundamentally, the Environment Agency, Natural Resources Wales scientists, what they want is an evidence-based conceptual model. They want data. They want you to demonstrate with data that you have the evidence to support your conceptual model and the conclusions that come out of that. So, excuse me. So, just the watchwords on data and evidence gathering. We should all know this, but it is often forgotten. When we need to start data collection and evidence collection as early as possible in a project. Okay, and as early as possible is when we're exploring, when we're assessing sites. We still have this situation where evidence gathering, geotechnical, water, and other evidence gathering is started way down the process, and there's an enormous amount of opportunities lost early on in the exploration phases, site assessment phases, that are lost because not enough effort's put into it early on. And it's expensive. The data's free when you're drilling to see how much sand and gravel is there, or limestone, or whatever it is. It's free because the exploration people are collecting the data. That's who's spending money on drilling. If you leave it too late, you've got to re-drill holes, and it becomes an expensive waste of money. I first wrote a paper on that in about 1988. And I could pull out that paper, and it's as relevant today as it was then. Where? On site, obviously, we need data on site. We need data off site because we're going to impact off site. We need data around receptors. And all that requires a conceptual model. In order to decide where we gather data off site and what receptors we think about for gathering data, we need to have started an impact assessment and in order to do that, we need a conceptual model. So if we're going to start as early as possible, we need to start thinking about that conceptual model, our first stage conceptual model, very early, which isn't necessarily difficult, but it needs to be done. Where needs to be sensible. It's very easy for me to say, we'll collect data. You need to collect data off-site and receptors. That may be impossible to do from a legal point of view, access point of view. It may be prohibitively expensive at a high-risk stage of the project. So it has to be constrained, it has to be sensible, and with anything that costs money, that money has to be targeted at the most important things. Again, in order to be sensible and targeted, you have to have a conceptual model to do it. You need to gather that evidence base on all the main aspects of water. You'll be directed to what those are through the step process that I discussed earlier. But in essence, you're looking at heads, groundwater levels, groundwater pressures, which are different. Well, they're not different, but they have different effects. The variability of those in space and time. Sounds like a chartered geologist interview, this. The chemistry of that water. The quality of the water, and chemistry and quality are different. The hydraulic properties of the systems you're working in, aquifers, non-aquifers, aquicludes, aquitards, all techie words that mean simple things. Mapping of features, hydrogeological mapping of groundwater dependent terrestrial ecosystems, and other receptors. So GIS, mapping, knowing where things are, and other stuff as well. I haven't got flow rates in there, I haven't got surface water, groundwater interaction stuff, all those sorts of things as well. How? It's important you think about how you're going to collect the data. The methods by which you collect data are important. Do you need high frequency data? Do you need spot data? Are you using old methods? Are there better methods? Chemistry data? Are you collecting data for chemistry analysis properly? Are you doing field analysis on those determinants that need to be done in the field? Are you getting data from authoritative sources? Are you using Jimmy Mack's rain gauge from his garden down the road, or are you putting the effort and money into buying authoritative data from the Met Office, or indeed from the Environment Agency? So authoritative data sources are important because you're delivering this information to people that understand where authoritative data sources are, because largely it's their data. Again, there's an iterative process involved. You can't necessarily do everything at day one. While you might be starting to gather information early, that may be limited to groundwater heads or some hydraulic properties from mineral exploration boreholes. As you gather that data and interpret and understand that data, you may then need to go out and do your off-site data collection and think about particularly sensitive receptors that may need particular monitoring. Just a word of warning on that last bullet, particularly with respect to extensions. Don't assume that your current scheme of monitoring is fit for purpose for an extension. There are many, many schemes of monitoring that aren't fit for purpose for what they were designed to be back in the day. So take a very objective view if you're looking at an extension, take a very objective view at your database, at your existing monitoring, and think hard about whether it's appropriate. It's, as I said earlier, it's important not to go too far up the tiers that I described, and it's important not to go around too many iterations. It's unnecessary to go high up the iterations and high up the tiers. It sets a high bar for yourself, and the higher the bar, the more costly your investigation. And it also sets a high bar for others that are following you. Yeah. So as an industry, it's important to me that things are kept appropriate, and that's the watchword. Enough is enough. When you've done enough, it's enough. Yeah, you don't need to keep going. Okay. I would say this, wouldn't I? But this does not need to be a consultant's charter. It isn't a consultant's charter. It's about doing things properly and in the right way, but it doesn't need to be over the top. And it's really important that the commissioning geologists, the geologists, hydrogeologists, whoever on the client side understand enough about the system and the methods to be able to constrain that. Because we as consultants simply get a bad name by the bad practice of people that take people for a ride. So very quickly on analysis, it's a boring slide, but it's one you can look at afterwards. As I said, we've got 3 tiers. Tier 1, which is the basic level, Tier 2, intermediate, Tier 3, detailed. And there's some sort of ideas there of what may be covered by each one of those tiers. A couple of key points that I wanted to bring out. In the vast majority of cases, you'll be sitting in Tier 2. And certainly at Enviro, we describe quite a lot of the HIAs as sitting between Tier 1 and Tier 2, or a sort of the bottom end of Tier 2. And that is very common, particularly for sand and gravel deposits, which are well constrained, well understood, easy to conceptualize, and easily tested, because the hydrogeology fits neatly into analytical solutions because of the nature of the beast. And you'll notice that detailed numerical modeling doesn't sit under Tier 2. These are the Environment Agency tiers, not mine. I put that out there. You know, detailed numerical modeling sits under Tier 3, which is an unusual thing. The one thing that isn't mentioned in this slide is the use of analogies. And in my opinion, analogies are by far the best representation of what's likely to happen than certainly better than analytical models, and I would argue are better than numerical models. Remember, any extension has a perfect analogy, because you've already got a quarry that's sitting there doing what it's doing. Analogies are particularly good for sand and gravel quarries, because usually you've got some monitoring around them, and they're going to behave in the same way, subject to some checking, and that you're not going into a different thing, but generally speaking. I looked at something recently where there was a very complicated numerical model done for a sand and gravel deposit in the Trent Valley, and I just went, why? You've got tens of sand and gravel quarries down the Trent Valley, all monitoring, all showing no material impact, all showing zones of influence that are well constrained, and you know, somebody's going out and doing a numerical model. It raises the bar. It's expensive, and provides nothing that an analogy or an analytical model wouldn't give. And that, when I was thinking about that, in fact, this morning as I was looking at this, I thought there's a point there, and I put this out as a question. But where we have something like river valley sand and gravel deposits, where we have more complex systems like karst or semi-karst limestone systems in the Mendips, in Yorkshire, in Cumbria, where we have other clusters of quarries. Should we as an industry be collaborating on data sets, on, if you like, zoned or catchment level, high level assessments, so that everybody's essentially learning from everybody else, and it can be shown that, you know, these systems are understood, predictable, and push that analogy method as hard as we can, rather than everybody sitting in their own bubble and one having conflicting conceptual models, or indeed repeating the same thing over and over again. So I put that out there. How much effort do we go to? This is a useful slide that comes out of the document, and I haven't changed this. This is exactly as it comes out of the document. I'm not saying I agree with the scores or weightings. I haven't really thought about it very hard. But it is a useful exercise to go through early on in your thought processes, particularly useful for a discussion between consultants and the operators, to get a feel for how complicated, how much effort it will be needed to overcome some of the regulatory barriers to getting an HIA finished. So a useful test. I wouldn't be a slave to it, but it is a good stop and think point in coming up with an approach. Quick slide, because it's important, on presentation. And I've just done a project in Ireland with the Planning Inspectorate in Ireland. Wasn't a quarrying project, it's a roads project, but I was sitting as an assistant inspector, so providing technical support to the inspector on a planning application. Slightly different system in Ireland, but effectively that's what I was doing, and it really drove home to me how we mess things up for ourselves on presentation of information. There were thousands and thousands of pages in this planning application. There was probably 1,000 pages just on hydrogeology and hydrology, which is what I was looking at. There were bits and pieces in different parts of this massive pile of paper. There were appendices of appendices of appendices. There was useful information presented deep in appendices of appendices of appendices. And there was almost irrelevant information, padding, that was presented in technical reports or the first appendix. And it's really this, that it was that experience that, as I say, drove home to me how we just don't make it easy for the people that are reading the documentation. There's no rocket science here. Keep the presentation of material accurate. Keep it brief. That's not to say too brief, but it doesn't need to be long and complicated. Those that work with me know I have a phrase for that, which I won't use today, but somebody will probably put it up or say it anyway. It's a little rude, but it says it like it is in the tin. Clarity is so important. Just keep stuff clear. Make it easy for the reader to read. Keep the details to appendices, not massive tables in the text. And keep ultra detail records in a box under your desk. And if somebody wants it, they'll ask for it. but there's probably one person that's reviewing the technical reporting that may want it. So don't give it to everybody to get bored with, or more importantly, to get confused with. So that presentation style is really important in getting that scientific message over, that technical scientific message over to the audience that we've identified.
We have our first question, James, which is more of a discussion point than a question. Okay, it says, James, despite following the logical processes you have expertly highlighted, the EA's ability to deliver permits and responses to planning applications in a rational, balanced and timely manner has deteriorated markedly, particularly during the COVID-19 crisis discussed, particularly in light of the EA's responsibilities under the Growth Act.
I'm not going to comment on COVID. Yeah, 2020 is the year of asterisks. It will always be remembered as the year of asterisks. Everybody's under pressure. If anything, the slide that I'm showing at the moment helps to overcome the COVID things, keeping things accurate, brief, clear. Is the way in which you can help the regulator do your bidding. I think it might come up on a slide in a minute. In fact, it does come up on the next slide. You've got to remember that the regulator, the Environment Agency, Natural Resources Wales are big organisations. Not everybody in those organisations is expert or experienced in what you want to talk to them about. Somebody might be expert or experienced in the regulatory elements, but know very little about the complexities and the nuances of hydrogeology. Somebody might be expert and experienced in fish, but aren't expert and experienced in river flows and hydrology, and so on and so forth. So it's important that you find the right person to speak to. That's not always easy, and you speak to them in their language. You know, while I've been negotiating with the Environment Agency and its predecessors for the last 20 odd years. It's what we do as a business. I can assure you, I know how frustrating it is. It might help that I get paid to do it, which takes the edge off a bit, but I get as frustrated as the next person. But the other side get frustrated as well, because they get frustrated when people just keep telling them the same thing, particularly when it's something that they can do absolutely nothing about. They have a job to do and they do try and do it. The best route through is providing them, guiding them with the information and the evidence base that you can collect to where you want to take them. And that's the advice. That's the only advice I can give. There's lots of politics, there's lots of issues, funding, resources, expertise at the coal face. All those things are absolutely valid. They're not perfect organisations. I totally agree that technically they've gone downhill since, you know, over the last 10, 15 years, particularly in the last 5 years. It's a cyclical system. I've seen the Environment Agency, NRA, at the zenith of their technical ability. I've seen them at the bottom before, and you know, and I would say it's about a 10-year cycle. We're probably close to the bottom of a cycle at the moment. It will go up, but it's very frustrating when it's low. Get all that, but we have to work with it. It's where we are. You know, there's no point. Well, there is point in shouting, but you've got to pick your battles, and you've got to mean what you say. Yeah, I'll do another presentation on appeals under the Water Resources Act, but I won't get distracted. See, you've got me on a hobby horse now, questioner, and Clive told me earlier that I wasn't to go off into the wild west and keep to the point. But a good point. I like the bit about expert. That was the best point in that question. So to help with that question, framing is important. Framing's about delivering your message in the right way to the right person. You can read those bullets yourself. I don't need to read them out for you. These applications, for dewatering and the HIAs that go with them are new. They're new for everyone. They're new for me. They're new for the environment agents. They're new for NRW. So there is a learning curve to go up. What seems obvious to you as an operator isn't obvious to everybody in the Environment Agency. As I said, the people that wrote the guidance aren't involved anymore. Yeah. So you're dealing with new people. There are technical misconceptions within the regulator and within operators, and indeed within some consultants. And there's technical naivety, you know, because people haven't gone up a learning curve in all the parties. As we've said, there's a lack of experience and expertise in the regulator. Or it's thin. There is expertise and experience in the regulator, but there's not. It tends to be concentrated in only a few people. That leads to fundamentally leads to a poor understanding of the risks. So it's difficult for somebody with poor experience and expertise to put the risk into the right profile. Yeah. So what happens then is everything's a big risk, and that leads to poor risk management and poor decision making, because the only way they can protect themselves as a regulator or as an individual probably is to assume everything's really, really bad. And then either somebody else will make the decision, or they'll perceive that there's a lot of protection in place, which is wrong. So that expertise and experience is a key thing. Therefore, it's important to present your information within the context or frame that audience can relate to. If you're dealing with an inexperienced or inexpert officer in the regulatory system, then you need to guide them. You need to give them the information in a way that they can assimilate, that they can discuss internally, and they can draw the right conclusions from. And that's all about framing. That's all about presenting things in the right way. So as an example of that, and just to link back to Barnaby's presentation last month, if we're thinking of, if we in assessing our project or our HIA, we recognize that the Water Framework Directive issues are important or critical, then you need to present your HIA and your evidence and your data and your analysis in a way that relates back to the Water Framework Directive and the criteria that the Environment Agency and NRW have to follow. Okay, it's not their choice. They have to follow a set of criteria in order to tick off their WFD assessment. If you don't know what those criteria are, then you're going to struggle to frame your work in the right way. So I use that as an example. There are many other examples of presenting the information in the right way. Okay, we're just about done, guys. So this is essentially the final slide. Just to pull what I think are the key things together, and you'll see on the right hand side there the same thing presented again. It presented a couple of slides ago, but that is by far the most important message. don't forget that the audience of the HIA has changed. The audience for your planning application HIA is different from the audience for your abstraction license application HIA. Doesn't necessarily mean you need two different HIAs, but certainly the one which supports your abstraction license application needs to be very focused on the Environment Agency and the way in which they think. That HIA needs to be more systematic. It needs a higher level of evidence and science. It needs better data. It needs a better database, and it needs to be tested. So that conceptual model and your iterative process needs to be tested, challenged internally, tested mathematically, and tested against the different data sets, because that is fundamentally how the Environment Agency and NRW will review the work. They will review it in a science evidence-based way. The author of that document needs to know their subject, because despite what you think, there are people in NRW and the Environment Agency that know their subject. And you need to know the rules. You need to know the rules by which you're playing so that you can frame your work within the context of those rules. The Environment Agency, NRW, have to follow the rules. That was a genuine cough. It wasn't me. And they do, if anything, they follow the rules too slavishly. But you need to know what the rules are, because that helps drop frustration and it gets you on the ladder. You need to start the process early and take the opportunities that are given to you essentially for free to gather evidence and data. Evidence and data are key because they feed into the conceptual model, and everything hangs off your conceptual model. It doesn't hang off numerical models. It doesn't hang off mathematical models. It hangs off your fundamental understanding of the hydrogeological processes that operate in and around your quarry. I may be an old fart, but I still believe that the conceptual model is key. If anybody's doing a chartered geologist interview with me, hang on to that subject. And don't forget, after you've done all that, you still have to apply for an abstraction license. And that, my friends, is the subject of a whole different presentation. Over to you, Teresa.
Well, thank you very much, James. That was an excellent presentation, and you obviously have expressed everything really expertly, because we have no more questions at this moment in time.
I could have also bored everybody to death, of course.
So, I quite like this picture on your last slide. Is that your Christmas party or summer party or something?
We're renowned for being late on projects, but on the basis of all the leaves on the trees, we've never been that late for a Christmas party. I don't even know who they are, to be honest. I think I think that's just stolen off the internet. It's one of our tea parties. Up until this year, we hold an annual tea party, and that was one of them.
Excellent. Everybody should have. Still no questions coming in. We've got one comment saying a very interesting presentation and a great overview. So that's a nice bit of praise for you.
Was that a member of staff?
No, it isn't actually.
No, good.
Perhaps it should be from your member of staff.
Well, I have noted that. I just as we've got a minute or two, anybody want to comment on my fantastic idea that the industry should collaborate on data gathering, where we have groups of quarries essentially in the same geological setting, like river valleys, river systems, the Mendips, limestone systems. It's like an EIG conference, Clive. You just get silence from the audience.
It's obviously very comprehensive. That's why James, I think, has done a great job. He did. Right, yeah. That was genuine. I haven't coughed for anything.
Anything given I'll do given what I've been talking about, are there where are the big gaps? You know, where are the big gaps that people are struggling with? You know, because on one level it's quite straightforward. You know, you do an HIA, you show that there's no impact, you design a scheme of monitoring that says, look, I can collect data that demonstrates there's no impact, or you know, there might be an impact and I've designed a mitigation system. So, you know, on that level, it's really straightforward. But we all know there are frustrations out there. So where are the blocking points? It'd be interesting. Is anybody from the Environment Agency on, Teresa? It'd be interesting to hear where their frustrations lie, perhaps.
It would be. We have one more question from in, or I think it's a question. It says, James made the point about paying to meet the experts at the EA and NRW. Surely if you pay for the service, the right people should be there.
I'm not sure I did mention paying, because you see, these people know which buttons to press, don't they? So there's a system called cost recovery. So we now, should we wish to consult with the Environment Agency, Natural England, NRW and others, subject to some rather weird rules, we have to pay for that consultation. I will declare my hand. I fundamentally disagree with the cost recovery process. I don't disagree with the fact that our regulators need to be properly funded, but the cost recovery system as it is ridiculous. It is, yes, it's ridiculous. That's all I can say on that. It is what it is. We have to go through it. The Environment Agency, Natural England, NRW need to up their game dramatically on the way in which the cost recovery system is implemented, and the level of expertise and experience of the people that are delivering the, I'm not even going to call it advice, I'm going to call it feedback, in order to be able to justify the cost and extract the value out of those discussions. I will leave it there for fear of never being able to be let through an Environment Agency office door again.
There is another comment on there, which is probably more addressed to the industry in general, I think. It says, it's a shame about regulator bashing feel of certain comments that are made, and that you'd be surprised at the poor applications that are received. So I guess that comes back to the point that you were making before about keeping it simple, but also checking to make sure they've got everything that they need in there and they're not submitting an application that's poor.
I totally agree. Obviously, I'm not privy to the range of applications that are submitted into the regulators, and we've been complimented on ours, so that's the only way I can judge it. But it just never fails to amaze me how very expert people, the stuff I've reviewed, very expert people make a total hash of the presentation. Obviously, there's inexpert people making applications or producing stuff that you would expect to make a hash of it. But it's not the regulator's fault if the applicant can't present stuff in a way that assists themselves by assisting the regulator. And it never fails to amaze me how people get frustrated by the fact that they've done a poor job.
Okay, well, there's no other questions coming in, so and we've just got to 1 o'clock, so I think we probably should end there. Thank you once again, James, for coming on to an EIG webinar and speaking. I think it was an excellent presentation. And at this point, we should give you a round of applause, but unfortunately, the audience won't be able to do that. So Clive and I will do that.
Thank you very much indeed. In fact, I think I can hear the applause from my shed. Can you hear it, Clive, over the other side of Nottinghamshire?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, excellent, thank you.
Probably the rain, though. That's okay.
Cheerio, everyone.
Okay, cheers, everyone. Yeah, just one last point, I suppose, just to remind people that they can catch up with the EIG webinar videos on James's will become a video online in due course.
And I'll put a plug if there is anybody left. We're doing another webinar from Envireauwater next week on a similar subject, but very much focused at the mineral planning consultants, mineral planners, estates, managers within the operators, to try and link some of these subjects back to the planning application process as well, to try and fill some of those gaps. If you go onto our website, you will find the details.
Cool. Okay, great. Okay, cheers, James. Thanks, Teresa.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.